On the rain-soaked docks of Busan, Yoon Ji-Hwan, a brilliant young genius living among shipping containers, survives by his wits after a corporate conspiracy destroyed his family. His life as a ghost is interrupted when a high-stakes digital transaction goes catastrophically wrong. Lim Seok-Jin, the iron-fisted boss of the Golden Dragon Syndicate, accidentally triggers a $50 million kill switch. Instead of fleeing, Ji-Hwan intercepts the deadly signal using a salvaged laptop, saving Seok-Jin's empire in seconds. Intrigued by Ji-Hwan's calm dominance and unmatched intellect, Seok-Jin recruits him to hunt the digital traitor within his syndicate. As they uncover the conspiracy, Ji-Hwan realizes the person who ruined his life is the same one threatening Seok-Jin. Together, the streetwise genius and the feared Mafia boss must combine mind and power to reclaim their stolen lives. In a violent showdown on a storm-tossed yacht, both are transformed. Ji-Hwan regains his identity and purpose, while Seok-Jin discovers that true power lies not in fear or wealth, but in loyalty and trust. The black SUV glided through the rain-slicked streets of Busan like a silent shark. Inside the plush leather interior, Lim Seok-Jin sat in total silence. He didn't look like a man who had just saved $50 million, he looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. His eyes were fixed on the young man sitting across from him. Yoon Ji-Hwan looked completely out of place. He was drenched to the bone, his oversized hoodie smelling of salt and old dampness. He clutched his salvaged laptop to his chest as if it were his only friend in the world. Despite the guards flanking him with cold, hard stars, Ji-Hwan didn't look afraid. He looked bored, his eyes tracking the neon lights of the city reflecting off the window. Seok-Jin adjusted his soaked suit jacket. Usually, anyone who saw him in a moment of weakness was dealt with quickly. That was the rule of the Golden Dragon Syndicate. But this boy was different. Ji-Hwan hadn't just seen him tremble, he had reached into the digital fire and pulled Seok-Jin's entire legacy out by the roots. "Who taught you to code like that?" Seok-Jin finally asked. His voice was deep and gravelly, the sound of a man used to being obeyed. Ji-Hwan didn't look up. The internet is a great teacher when you have nothing else to do but watch the world go by from a sidewalk. One of the guards grew at the lack of respect, but Seok-Jin held up a gloved hand to silence him. He was fascinated. He saw the way Ji-Hwan's fingers moved, twitching slightly, as if they were still typing invisible lines of code in the air. This wasn't just a lucky homeless kid. This was a weapon that the world had thrown away, and Seok-Jin was an expert at finding value in things others discarded. "You saved me tonight," Seok-Jin said, leaning forward until his sharp, scarred face was inches from Ji-Hwan's. Most people would ask for money. Some would ask for a job. But you haven't said a word. Ji-Hwan finally puts the boss's gaze on. His glasses were slightly fogged, but his eyes were sharp and clear. "I didn't do it for you. I did it because the code was sloppy." It was an insult to the machine. A small, dangerous smile played on Seok-Jin's lips. It wasn't a smile of kindness, but of discovery. He had spent years hiring expensive Ivy League graduates who trembled when he entered the room. Yet, here was a boy in rags who looked at him like he was just another bug in a system. "I was going to have my men drop you at the next corner," Seok-Jin whispered. "But I think I'd rather see what else you can do. You're not a beggar, Ji-Hwan. You're an architect who just hasn't built his palace yet." As the car turned toward the high-tech fortress on the hill, Seok-Jin decided to keep his gun tucked away. He wanted to see how deep this boy's genius went, and more importantly, he wanted to know if this ghost could help him find the person who had tried to destroy him. The sun rose over Busan, but it didn't bring any warmth to the cold, damp docks. After the long, strange night in the back of the SUV, Seok-Jin had let Ji-Hwan go with a warning and a handful of cash. Ji-Hwan didn't want the money, but he took it. He walked back to his home, a small space behind a stack of rusted blue shipping containers. He wanted to forget the glowing screens, the sharp suits, and the smell of expensive leather. He just wanted to be a ghost again. But the city felt different now. As Ji-Hwan sat on his plastic crate, trying to focus on a book he had found in the trash, he felt eyes on him. Every time a black car drove past the harbor, his heart skipped a beat. He tried to blend into the crowd of morning workers, pulling his dirty hoodie low over his face. He walked 3 miles to a different district, weaving through narrow alleys and hidden shortcuts. Yet, when he turned a corner, he saw them. 2 men in dark suits were leaning against a brick wall. They weren't hiding. They stood tall and powerful, their presence acting like a dark stain on the busy street. One of them, a man with a buzz cut and a stone-cold face, stepped into Ji-Hwan's path. "The boss says you have a habit of disappearing," the man said. His voice was polite, but it sounded like a threat. "I don't belong to your boss," Ji-Hwan replied, his voice shaking just a little. "I fixed his problem. We're even. Tell him to find someone else to play with his computers." Ji-Hwan tried to push past, but the man placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. It wasn't a violent grip, but it was firm enough to show that Ji-Hwan wasn't going anywhere. "You don't understand, kid," the guard said, looking down at Ji-Hwan's scruffy clothes. "People like us don't find talent like yours every day. And people like you don't survive long on these streets when the people you embarrassed last night come looking for revenge. You think you're safe here? You're a target." The guard reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean, white envelope. He didn't offer it, he tucked it into the pocket of Ji-Hwan's tattered hoodie. "The boss isn't ordering you. He's offering a job. A real one. A place to sleep, a desk that doesn't shake, and all the tech you can dream of. He wants you to find the person who planted that virus." The men stepped back into their car, leaving Ji-Hwan standing alone in the rain. He reached into his pocket and felt the heavy weight of the envelope. He looked at his shaking, dirty hands and then at the luxury car disappearing into the fog. He realized the streets weren't his home anymore, they were a cage. The Mafia hadn't kidnapped him, but they had shown him a truth he couldn't ignore. The ghost had been found, and there was no going back to the shadows. The black car returned Ji-Hwan to the fortress on the hill, but this time, the gates opened wide as if they were a guest of honor. Seok-Jin was waiting for him in a room that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. High above the crashing waves of the Busan coast, the walls were lined with massive glass screens flickering with data. It was cold, clean, and silent, a sharp contrast to the dirty, noisy docks where Ji-Hwan had spent his last 3 years. Seok-Jin stood in the center of the room, looking at a digital map of the city. He didn't turn around when Ji-Hwan entered. "Most people think the Mafia is just about muscle and guns," the boss said, his voice echoing off the glass. "But today, the real wars are fought with numbers. My empire is built on data, and someone just tried to delete it." He tapped a button, and a red light began to pulse on the main screen. It showed the code Ji-Hwan had stopped the night before. That virus wasn't an accident. It was a masterpiece of sabotage. It was designed to stay hidden until it was too late to stop. Only someone who knows my system inside and out could have put it there. Ji-Hwan walked slowly toward the screens, his eyes reflecting the blue and red light. For the first time, the tired, dull look in his eyes vanished. He looked at the lines of code like a musician looking at a sheet of music. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, itching to touch the keys. "I have the best security team money can buy," Seok-Jin continued, finally turning to face the young man. "But they are all afraid of me. Fear makes them slow." It makes them miss things. You aren't afraid of me, Ji-Hwan. You saw the truth in the dark when everyone else was blind. Seok-Jin stepped closer, his shadow falling over the small, scruffy genius. I am offering you a deal. I will give you this room. I will give you the fastest servers in the country. In return, I want the name of the traitor. I want you to hunt the person who thought they could outsmart me. Ji-Hwan looked at the luxury around him, then down at his frayed sleeves. He knew that accepting this meant stepping into a world of violence. But he also knew that the person who wrote this virus used a specific signature, a style of coding he had seen once before. It was the same style used to frame his father and destroy his family 10 years ago. I don't care about your money or your empire, Ji-Hwan said, his voice quiet but steady. But I know who wrote this code. And I want to find them even more than you do. Seok-Jin nodded, a grim spark of respect in his eyes. He pulled out a high-tech chair and gestured for Ji-Hwan to sit. Then welcome to the war, architect. Don't just find him. Destroy him. Ji-Hwan sat down, and as his fingers hit the mechanical keys, the ghost of Busan began to fade away. In his place, a genius was waking up, and he was ready to set the world on fire. The cold, sterile air of the command center hummed with the sound of cooling fans. For 3 days, Ji-Hwan did not leave the room. He traded his old, salted rags for a simple black sweater. Though he refused the expensive silk suits Seok-Jin offered. He didn't want to look like a mobster, he just wanted to work. Seok-Jin watched from the glass balcony above, a cup of bitter coffee in his hand. Below him, Ji-Hwan was a blur of motion. The young man didn't use a mouse, his fingers danced across 3 different keyboards at once, his eyes darting between 6 monitors. To the guard standing at the door, he looked gibberish. To Seok-Jin, he looked like a man disarming a field of invisible landmines. They didn't just plant one virus, Ji-Hwan muttered, his voice raspy from lack of sleep. He didn't look up as Seok-Jin walked down the stairs. The $50 million was just the bait. While your team was busy trying to save the money, a second program was crawling through your payroll files. It was set to leak the home addresses of every one of your men to the police at midnight. Seok-Jin's grip tightened on his cup. If that had happened, his entire organization would have vanished overnight. Can you kill it? It's already dead, Ji-Hwan said. He hit the enter key with a sharp click. I didn't just delete it. I fed it back into the sender's server. Their own computers are currently melting down. They'll be too busy trying to save their own data to worry about yours for at least 48 hours. Ji-Hwan leaned back, his glasses reflecting a waterfall of green text. For the first time, Seok-Jin saw a flicker of something other than boredom in the boy. It was the thrill of the hunt. Ji-Hwan wasn't just defending, he was starting to enjoy the fight. You're doing more than I asked, Seok-Jin noted, his voice low. I'm finding the pattern, Ji-Hwan replied, his face hardening. The person who wrote this code is arrogant. They use a specific backdoor entry that was patented by a tech company called Mirror Systems 12 years ago. My father was the lead designer there before the company was liquidated and he was sent to prison on false charges. The room went silent. The high-tech walls suddenly felt like the bars of a cage. Seok-Jin realized then that Ji-Hwan wasn't just a lucky find or a hired hand. He was a survivor of the same shadow war that the syndicate was currently losing. I'm not just clearing your code, boss, Ji-Hwan said, finally looking at Seok-Jin. I'm following the breadcrumbs. Whoever is trying to take you down is the same person who took my life away. And I'm going to make sure they regret ever hitting send. Seok-Jin nodded slowly. He recognized that look. It was the look of a man who had finally found a reason to stop being a ghost. The resources of the Golden Dragon are yours, architect. Find them. Bring them into the light. The work didn't stop when the sun went down. The high-tech villa remained a hive of glowing blue light and clicking keys, but the air inside felt heavy. Sensing the tension, Seok-Jin did something his man had never seen him do. He closed Ji-Hwan's laptop and pointed toward the door. Even an architect needs to breathe, the boss said. Come. I know a place where the noise of the city can't reach us. They drove down to a quiet stretch of the Busan coast, far from the gleaming skyscrapers. They stopped at a small pojamika, a bright orange tent pitched right on the edge of the sand. Inside, the air was warm and thick with the smell of grilled squid and salty sea air. The only sounds were the distant crash of the waves and the rhythmic thump-thump of a knife hitting a cutting board. Seok-Jin sat on a low plastic stool, his expensive suit looking out of place against the humble surroundings. He poured a small glass of soju for himself and pushed a bottle of cider toward Ji-Hwan. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They just watched the steam rise from their bowls of spicy noodles. My father used to bring me to places like this, Ji-Hwan said gently, breaking the silence. He stared into his bowl as if he could see the past in the broth. Before the accident. Before the police took everything. He used to say that the ocean is the only thing in the world that doesn't care how much money you have. Seok-Jin looked at the young man, seeing the sadness that no amount of genius could hide. He was a wise man, Seok-Jin replied, his voice uncharacteristically soft. My father was different. He taught me that if you don't build a wall, the ocean will swallow you whole. I spent my whole life building that wall, only to find out that the people I invited inside were the ones digging under it. In the dim light of the tent, the gap between the Mafia boss and the homeless boy began to shrink. They weren't masters and a servant anymore. They were two men who had been hardened by the same cold world. Ji-Hwan realized that Seok-Jin wasn't just a criminal, he was a person who had been betrayed so many times that he had forgotten how to trust. The man who wrote that code, Ji-Hwan said, looking Seok-Jin in the eye. He didn't just target your money. He targeted your pride. He wanted to show you that your wall was useless. Seok-Jin nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. He raised his glass toward Ji-Hwan. Then it's a good thing I found someone who knows how to build a better one. We aren't just protecting a syndicate anymore, Ji-Hwan. We're finishing a fight that started a long time ago. As they sat by the dark Busan sea, the salt and the soju sealed a silent promise. They were no longer working together out of fear or greed. They were working for justice. The peace of the seaside meal felt like a distant memory the moment they stepped back into the villa. The command center was no longer silent, he was screaming. Red warning lights pulsed against the glass walls, and every monitor was flooded with a chaotic waterfall of gibberish. They're hitting us, Ji-Hwan shouted over the sound of the server alarms. He dived into his chair, his fingers already flying across the keys. It's a massive DDoS attack. They are flooding the system with so much junk data that the security grid is crashing. They aren't just trying to steal money anymore, they're trying to blind us. Seok-Jin stood behind him, his face turning into a mask of cold stone. He reached into his desk and pulled out his silver pistol, checking the magazine. Why blind us now? Because they're coming for the front door, Ji-Hwan shouted. He tapped a key, forcing a single grainy security camera to stay alive. On the screen, 3 black vans roared through the villa's outer gates. Men in tactical gear jumped out, carrying heavy tools and weapons. The villa shook as an explosion rocked the lower level. The power flickered, turning the room into a cave of shadows lit only by the glowing screens. Seok-Jin's guards rushed to the hallway, the sound of gunfire echoing up the marble stairs. Ji-Hwan, forget the money. Lock the elevators. Seok-Jin commanded, standing by the heavy, reinforced door. I can't. Ji-Hwan's teeth were gritted in concentration. Sweat dripped down his nose. They've locked me out of the building's hardware. The traitor is live-hacking me from the outside. If I lose this fight, the doors will open for them automatically. Ji-Hwan felt a familiar chill. This was the same feeling he had years ago, the feeling of being trapped by a superior mind. But he wasn't that scared little boy anymore. He closed his eyes for a split second, visualizing the flow of the data. He stopped fighting the attack and instead opened a trapdoor in the server. He let the rival's virus rush in, then slammed the digital door shut, looping the attack back onto the hackers. A loud clack echoed through the room as the electronic locks engaged. Elevators are dead. Gates are locked, Ji-Hwan gasped, his chest heaving. Outside the door, the sound of fighting grew louder. Seok-Jin stood tall, his eyes fixed on the entrance. He didn't look back, but his voice was steady. You did your part, architect. Now watch me dominate. As the first attacker kicked at the door, Ji-Hwan didn't hide. He stayed at his station, his fingers moving even faster. He was no longer just a victim of the shadows. He was the one holding the light, and he wouldn't let it go out. The smoke from the firefight downstairs began to drift under the door, but Ji-Hwan didn't move. He lived in a world of code, and right now, that world was screaming the truth. While Seok-Jin stood guard with his weapon drawn, Ji-Hwan's fingers flew across the keyboard like a pianist, playing a final, desperate song. He had trapped the rival's virus, and now he was peeling back its layers, tracing the digital footprints back to their source. I have him, Ji-Hwan whispered. His voice was trembling, but not from fear. Seok-Jin didn't turn his head, his eyes still fixed on the heavy door. Who is it? Give me a name. Ji-Hwan didn't answer right away. He stared at the screen as a hidden file directory opened. Inside were thousands of encrypted messages, but it was the digital signature at the bottom of the screen that made his blood run cold. It was a small icon of a golden compass, the exact same symbol he had seen on the legal documents that had sent his father to prison 10 years ago. It's Director Choi, Ji-Hwan said, his breath catching in his throat. You're head of finance. The man who has been at your right hand for a decade. Seok-Jin's shoulders stiffened. Choi wasn't just an employee, he was the man who managed every hundred the syndicate owned. Are you sure, boy? That is a heavy accusation. I'm more than sure, Ji-Hwan said, his eyes filling with hot tears of anger. He didn't just start working against you recently. He's been funneling your money into a shell company called Miru Global 4 years. That's the same company that bought my father's patents after they framed him. Choi wasn't just your accountant, Seok-Jin. He was the architect of my family's destruction. He stole my father's life, and now he's trying to steal yours. The realization hit the room harder than the bullets hitting the door outside. The deadly mistake Seok-Jin had made wasn't a technical error, it was trusting the man who had been feeding on his empire like a parasite. Choi had used the syndicate's power to crush small geniuses like Ji-Hwan's father, and now he was finished with his boss. Seok-Jin lowered his gun slightly, a look of pure, cold fury crossing his scarred face. He realized that he and the homeless boy weren't just accidental partners. They were two victims of the same monster. He's at the harbor, Ji-Hwan said, tapping a final key to track Choi's private cell phone signal. He's preparing to board a yacht. He thinks he's escaped with everything. Seok-Jin turned toward Ji-Hwan, and for the first time, he reached out and placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. He hasn't escaped. He just gave us a reason to finish this together. The sky over the Busan harbor had turned a bruised shade of purple, and the rain fell in heavy, stinging sheets. Out in the choppy water, Director Choi's luxury yacht rocked violently against the rising waves. Inside the main cabin, the lights flickered as lightning cracked overhead. Director Choi stood by the window, his face pale, clutching a briefcase. He thought he had won. He thought he was free. Suddenly, the yacht's engines groaned and died. The hum of the air conditioner cut out, leaving only the sound of the howling wind. What is happening? Choi screamed at his guards. Get us moving. Before they could answer, the heavy glass doors shattered. Lim Seok-Jin stepped through the shards of glass, his black suit soaked and his eyes burning with a silent rage. Behind him, Ji-Hwan hurried to a central console, clutching his laptop like a shield. Choi, Seok-Jin's voice was lower than the thunder. You should have run faster. Choi's guards drew their weapons, and the cabin exploded into chaos. Seok-Jin moved with a dangerous speed, flipping a heavy oak table to create cover. The sound of gunfire filled the small space, echoing off the expensive wood walls. Ji-Hwan. Now. Seok-Jin roared, firing back at the guards to keep them pinned down. Ji-Hwan dived behind the bar, his fingers already blurring across the keys. The yacht was a smart boat, controlled by a central computer, and that was Choi's biggest mistake. Ji-Hwan didn't just need to stop the boat, he needed to lock the data Choi was trying to delete. I'm inside their local network. Ji-Hwan shouted over the roar of the storm. He's trying to wipe the evidence of the mirror global fraud. If I don't stop the upload in 60 seconds, my father's name stays buried forever. The boat tilted sharply as a massive wave hit. Ji-Hwan slid across the floor, his laptop nearly flying from his grip. One of Choi's guards saw his chance and lunged toward the boy with a knife. Seok-Jin didn't hesitate. He took a hit to the shoulder to step in front of Ji-Hwan, disarming the guard with a brutal strike. Keep typing. Seok-Jin hoisted, blood soaking his white shirt. Don't look at them. Look at the screen. Ji-Hwan blocked out the noise and the fear. He saw the delete progress bar at 95%. With a final, desperate cry, he wrote a line of ghost code that he had practiced 1,000 times in his head during those long nights on the docks. He hit enter just as the boat pitched again. The screens on the yacht turned bright white. A message appeared in bold, black letters. Upload finished. Evidence recovered. Director Choi fell to his knees, his face ghostly white. All the power he had stolen, all the lives he had ruined, were now stored in a file headed straight to the Supreme Prosecutor's office. Ji-Hwan looked up, his glasses cracked but his eyes shining. Seok-Jin stood over him, breathing hard, his hand resting on the boy's head. The storm was still raging, but for the first time in 10 years, the air felt clear. The storm finally passed, leaving the Busan harbor quiet and bathed in the soft, gray light of a new morning. The yacht was now a crime scene, swarming with police officers who were busy carrying out boxes of evidence that Director Choi had tried so hard to hide. For the first time in a decade, the news wasn't talking about a homeless ghost or a mafia war. They were talking about the exoneration of a brilliant scientist named Yoon and the fall of a corrupt financial empire. Ji-Hwan stood on the pier, his hands tucked into the pockets of a clean, warm jacket. He looked out at the water, watching the waves settle. He felt lighter, as if the salt air had finally washed away the grime of the streets and the weight of his father's shame. A heavy footstep sounded behind him. Lim Seok-Jin approached, his arm in a sling and his face pale but calm. He didn't look like a terrifying mafia boss anymore. He looked like a man who had closed a very long, very painful chapter of his life. He stood beside Ji-Hwan, and for a long time, they both just watched the sun climb over the horizon. The syndicate is changing, Seok-Jin said, his voice steady. The Golden Dragon won't be fighting over docks and gambling dens anymore. We have a lot of money to return and a lot of Things to fix. But I can't do that with just muscle. I need a brain that sees the things I miss. Ji-Hwan turned to him, a small, knowing smirk playing on his lips. You're asking the beggar to stay? Seok-Jin gave a short, rare laugh. I'm asking the architect to build something real. You run the shadows, Ji-Hwan. You keep the digital world safe and find the monsters hiding behind keyboards. I'll stay in the light and make sure no one ever dares to touch you again. Ji-Hwan looked back at the city. He thought about the thousands of people living their lives, unaware of the invisible wars fought in the wires beneath their feet. He realized he didn't want to be a ghost anymore, and he didn't need to be a king. He wanted to be a guardian. I have a list of other mistakes your friends made over the years, Ji-Hwan said, pulling a small, high-tech device from his pocket. It's going to take a long time to fix them all. Seok-Jin nodded, looking at the boy who had saved his life and his soul. Then we better get to work. Together, the boss and the genius walked away from the harbor, disappearing into the waking city. They were no longer two men broken by betrayal. They were a new kind of power, one that lived in the shadows but fought for the light.